Hello everyone, welcome to Security Tidbits and Bytes. My name is Eddie Oaks and I'm hosting. Today's topic is ISE personas and working with them during a deployment. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is I have two ISE servers. If you see this IP address here and this IP address here, we have two different ISE servers. The first thing we want to do before this, which I've already done, which is separate because it depends on your own environment, but is make sure that you have the two DNS entries for these in your DNS server, your local DNS server. You want to make sure you make an entry for each of those corresponding to the host name, because that is the only way that we're going to be able to do the steps required for this video. Okay, so the thing we're going to be talking about is personas and distributed deployment. So let's go ahead and dive right in. I'm going to log into both servers. Okay, we're going to go ahead and log into the second one as well. All right, so for the personas, what we're going to do is we're simply doing a two-node deployment, which is a simple, small deployment. It's the smallest deployment you can do. With the personas, you're gonna notice that there's three personas that we're really gonna be focused on for the purposes of this video. But we're gonna show you the different personas. So once you log into the dashboard, we're gonna go ahead and go into the administration system deployment, and we're gonna do that for both nodes. So I'm gonna go ahead and click on over here, click here, deployment. Lab ISE, do the same thing for over here. This one's just called ISE. Remember, the DNS entries have to match just like that. So all right, so you notice it says, first and foremost, it says role is in standalone mode. Anytime you go to add and cluster, anytime you go to add any devices to this, you have to make sure that you hit the make primary. That's what the make primary button does. Is once you make it primary, it kind of lets it know that it's about to start allowing other nodes to join it. So if you go back here on the deployment nodes list, you notice that register is not an option. But once we make this node primary, that register becomes an option, and then it allows us to register the other ISE nodes. Okay. So here's your personas. I mean, it looks more straightforward here, so this is why I wanted to take you here. So you see that it says administration. This is a toggle button that right now we can't switch because standalone has to do everything, right? Has to do everything. Well, these three, right? This is optional. So for the standalone, once we make it primary, once we start aggregating, we're gonna notice that in any deployment, the maximum amount of administration nodes that you can have is 2, and they each have a role of primary and secondary. Basically, what that means is that one of them is going to be actually active, while the other one's on standby. You can't actually use it until you notice one fails, and the process is manual and it can be automatic as well. But in my experience, the automatic portion doesn't work as well because sometimes it flops earlier than you need it to, and these nodes, for when they restart to get the GUI back up and running, it literally takes it a give or take 15 minutes, right? So having a machine flop on you faster than you want it to is really not a good thing. So I probably would recommend having the node automatic failover turned off, and I'll show you then a subsequent video where that is. Okay. And it comes off by default, I believe. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and go into monitoring, the other persona. So this persona, actually, let me take a step back. Talking about administration, right? The administration is really just a GUI. That's all it is. That's all it is. So when you want to manipulate it and do this, it doesn't mean that if this goes down, the administration node, your network, your radius and everything still works, right? Your administration is simply the GUI, which is what we're logging into right now. So later on, when you want to log in, and if you have a node that has dedicated administration, dedicated monitoring, dedicated policy services, right? For the administration portion is where the one that you're going to leverage to log in and make the changes we're making now, right? The monitoring one used to be called monitoring and troubleshooting, which is why you see MNT down here. And you can make it a dedicated MNT, which means it's not going to do anything else but MNT. And if you select it, though, you notice that it basically lets you know that it can only be selected after registering the node in deployment. In other words, we have to register a new node and put it in monitoring and then put it as dedicated. So we can't. That's why it doesn't give you the option to do it just yet. Okay. Now, as well, this also, in any deployment, the most amount of nodes you can do in any single cluster is going to be 2 for monitoring and troubleshooting. Again, they also play a role of primary and secondary, right? So that's how those work. And you can turn on and off these roles or personas per se as you see fit once we start deploying more nodes. In our case, we're doing a dual node deployment, meaning they're both going to do everything. We're just going to have primary and secondary for the administration and monitoring, and I'll show you how we're going to set that up shortly. Okay. Now for the policy services, this is actually your Radius and TACACS server per se, right? This is where you're going to point your devices to do TACACS authentication if you do device admin, right? This is also where you're going to point your devices if you're doing network authentication and doing Radius, right? So when you enable policy services, that's what that is essentially. So you're enabling session services, and if you look, it says services include network access, which is the Radius, posturing, guest and client provisioning as well. Then right under, you see where it says include node and node group. You can group nodes if you see fit, right? Let's say the way that I've used it. I worked with a big company that had offices all over the world. So they had 4 PSNs particularly in the United States. So out of those 4 policy services nodes, I can put them in a group and call them US, which makes it easier just for management, maintenance, visibility, and whatnot. Makes it easier just to group. And you can also use it for failover, because it also we'll get into that in a subsequent video as well when we talk about failover and whatnot. Okay. For profiling service, it also does your profiling. So if you have your profiling license, would be the only time I would recommend to turn this on, because what this does is it leverages the information gathered from the probes that you configure on the actual PSNs. Okay, so that's basically what that does. The TC NAC is something that I really want to do in a subsequent video, because I really love this service. Briefly to tell you about it is, if something gets through the firewall and the firewall can't do anything because it's too late, once it finds out and does its analysis, in most firewalls cases, well, what firepower could do is actually send ISE this notification, this information, so that ISE could leverage that and then send a COA to the machine if it needs to, so that it can reset the authentication, force it to re-authenticate. Once it re-authenticates, it can put it in its own VLAN if you'd like it to, right? Give a different VLAN tag. You could put a different ACL to provide different or limited access, perhaps for remediation purposes, right? Put it on a remediation VLAN. Once you remediate and you get everything to make sure that whatever was on the device that got through the firewall has been remediated, then perhaps allow the computer to re-authenticate once again, thus, getting it on the network. So that's what I like about that. So I really want to focus on a video just on this portion in the future, hopefully not too far. Enable SXP service. You see it says source group. I used to call it security group, but source group tag exchange protocol is basically used to propagate IP to source group tag, binding across network devices. So if you're trying to do that, you can enable it here. This is TACACS. So if you need TACACS, you need to turn this on. You need to turn that on up there, and this is going to be your TACACS server, which is going to be the one that responds to TACACS request. And then, of course, last but not least, we have enable passive identity service, which enables an enterprise to connect to domain controllers and subscribe to authentication events. I don't know if we'll discuss this in a future video too much in detail, but maybe. PX Grid. We see for PX Grid here, and enables PX Grid Cloud. PX Grid is basically, it stands for Platform Exchange Grid, which enables information sharing between network devices in real time and on demand, and it does require an advantage license for you to use PX Grid. But PX Grid is great to use information between devices that may not have otherwise talked, using RESTful API interfaces and whatnot. So yeah, that's what all the personas are. So in this case, since I said we're doing a dual deployment, I'm going to make sure that I make this one primary. So when I make it primary, I save it down here, and now it's going to force this node to let it know that, hey, we might have other nodes to register. Now this one, leave it on standalone. Don't make this secondary one primary, because it will error out, because then this one is going to be looking to overtake the config. And if they're both trying to overtake the config, it will not work. So we wait till this one has come back up, or has come back up. Once it says server response, the node was updated successfully on the bottom, like you see there. It's ready to go. So we're gonna go back to deployment nodes list, or you can go back to, again, system administration deployment. It's the same thing, or you can just click right here. It's gonna take you to the same list. And when you go here, now you notice that the register option, like I stated before, is now really available. Notice it's still administration, monitoring, policy services, doing all three. And you also see that it's primary admin node, primary monitoring. And what I didn't mention about policy services when speaking about it is that policy services, actually, there is no primary or secondary. Every node works. So the moment every node that you configure as a PSN, you can actually send TACACS and radius requests, and it will respond, and it'll pick up the entire config right from the admin node, right? The other thing to note is that if you're doing dedicated nodes for every device and you're doing a really big deployment, you really need to do a big deployment. It allows for a maximum of 50 PSNs. Okay, so that's the maximum amount. Also, when we were talking about node groups, you can form node groups that reside in the same like LAN or behind a load balancer. That way, if one of the nodes like fails during and that it's in the group, the other nodes detect that failure and reset any URL redirected sessions. So anyways, let's go ahead and register a node. For a fully qualified domain name, we're going to type in lab-ISE, and we're getting that from the second node. So you see the second node that's the IP. Remember, I said that this DNS entry has to be in there and resolve to this IP address, right? Which I already put that in my network. And then the password that you need here is the password from this node, not from this one. So if you put different passwords, you're putting in the password of the other node, right? Which I happen to have two different passwords. So I'm putting in the second node. I have password 1 and password 2. Okay, once it has been completed, you notice it notices, it picks it up. You see, I'm on my first node on 153, not on 201, which is this one. I'm on 153 and it picked it up. So that's good. So now it's saying the role is secondary from this one, because this is the one that we made primary, remember? Okay, so now you see this node. This is the other node, the other ISE node. So we're configuring that node. We're configuring not the node we're on, but the second node, right? So it's in secondary role, administration. We're gonna have everything turned on, monitoring, everything turned on the same. No node group profiling. We're gonna also turn on TACACS. Now we're not doing PX grid. We're not doing anything else of the sort for right now, right? Later on we can turn these on. If we go to do the for video, we can always turn it on whenever we want. But for now, this is good enough. We're gonna hit submit. Now you see that the node was registered successfully. The data will be synced to the node, and then the application server will be restarted on the node. This processing may take several minutes to complete. When failover is required among multiple PSNs, please put the nodes in a node group. See that? That's what we were talking about earlier. All right, so now we're going to see both of them, but you see that this is going to be primary and secondary, see? So this one's in progress. So this is going to take a good 15 minutes maybe. And I'll time it. Here, I'll put a timer on so you can see it. All right, so that took 23 minutes and about 50 seconds or so to complete this process. I hope this has been informative. Thank you for watching. And remember to protect yourselves out there.